Well, hello viewers, welcome back once again to Mark on Motoring. Now, I weren't around in the 1970s, but from what I hear, the 70s pretty much was summed up by a heat wave, Saturday night fever, and the majority of the British workforce being on strike. So perhaps it's not such a bad thing that I missed out on that. Now, throughout the 1960s, Britain had some fantastic little sports cars. Things like the MGB and the Austin Healey were always big sellers, particularly in the US market. So, come the 1970s, Triumph wanted a car to, well, something to roll in the future, or as they put it, the shape of things to come. So behind me we have the TR7. Now the TR7 was considered, there were a couple of different proposals, one from MG, one from Triumph. Now the MG would have been a mid-engine car, the Triumph being a more conventional front-engined rear-wheel drive car. The US market, as I say, was crucial to with regarding sales for these cars. So there was always intended that there would be a V8, but that didn't come till much later on. The majority of cars were like this one here, a 2 litre, and the TR8s were badged, the V8s were badged a TR8 rather than a TR7. Now the cars use an adaptation of the Dolomite engine, which was originally in 1850, bored out to 2 litres. There was also a very limited run of sprint models with a 16-valve head. I believe we're looking in the region of around 60-61 units only of those cars. So the 2 litre engine in this car produces somewhere in the region of about 105 horsepower. 60 should come up in a little around 10 seconds with a top speed of about 110 miles per hour. Obviously, when I've been doing research, figures do vary somewhat, a little bit either way, but that seems to be the general consensus on these cars. This particular model is a 5-speed transmission. They were available with 4-speed transmissions and also with an automatic as well. Now, before we go any further, I would like to thank the Great British Car Journey and Drive Dad's Car, because that's where I am today, where I'm going to be able to take out this smashing vehicle to review for you. The thing with the TR7 is this is actually identical to a car that my dad had. Different model year, but same model, same colour. Now, I must admit, I did have some preconceptions about this car, and I actually phoned my dad and asked him about his experience of the TR7. And basically, the first thing he said is, it's like riding on a skateboard. He actually saw the cars coming out as he was sort of school leaving age, thought they looked fantastic, this really modern looking wedge design. Obviously 3 or 4 years later, when he started to get into a position where he could perhaps look to own one of these cars himself, he bought a well-used example, and he actually had the engine out of it and stripped down on the kitchen floor, but obviously it was a different time. And my dad probably isn't the only person who's perhaps not got so much love for this car as what people have nostalgia for some of the other models. But I thought, rather than hating on the car, why not come and have a go in one and actually see for myself what it's like. So that's what we're going to do today. So today we're finally out in a Triumph TR7. Now, I spoke to my father who owned one of these cars, and he said it was a lot like riding a skateboard when he had one. So let's see what it's really like. So first impressions, the ride is a little bit on the jiggly side. You're also quite aware when you get into the car, it's very, very low. Obviously we can't go too crazy down here on this industrial estate. Obviously we've got other vehicles like this van here. But hopefully it should be just enough to give us a feel for the car. Now I do quite like this steering wheel, it does feel quite small and quite nice in hand. Obviously a very 70s design with these squares everywhere. Now the steering is a little bit heavy at very low speeds, but I must admit it's not as heavy as I thought it might be, especially when you consider that this has got a 2-litre engine under the bonnet. But once you're rolling, the steering's actually quite light and it feels quite precise as well. I do quite like it. Now obviously here at the Great British Car Journey, we are on an industrial estate. Now I'm here during the week, so there are other businesses open on here. There is also a site speed limit to adhere to as well. The gearbox actually feels pretty slick as well. Again, something else I'm quite surprised around it. I know my 990s car, when the engine's cold, it doesn't always want to slot into first gear, but this seems quite happy.
That is tight.
Now this little roundabout here, the car does seem to drive pretty well around it. Yeah, it certainly picks up its heels when you want to. Although, as I've said before, the car is quite low and firm, and on a road that's a little bit bumpy like this, you really wouldn't want to be going too quickly. On a nice smooth road though, I'm sure that wouldn't be a problem. Now the accelerator pedal, I notice, is very offset to the right in this car, and quite spaced from the brake pedal as well, so probably not well suited to tow and heeling. You can get the car through the slalom, but yeah, it does require a bit of effort. Now I do like the view out the front over this, you can see the hump on this bonnet, and I do like this dashboard as well, very angular and unusual for a car of this age. It's quite deep as well. Obviously you've got this sort of T-shelf area at the front on both sides as well. I have got the window slightly cracked in here because it is quite tight in here, and even on a day like today in February, it is getting quite warm in this car. With legends like Spenking and Harris Mann behind the design of this vehicle, British Layland had high hopes for this car, and there was even plans to have other models on the platform, most notably the Lynx, of which they made one prototype. Now the Lynx was a 2+2 coupe version, and actually wasn't a bad looking car in all honesty. Probably would have done quite well, especially with a V8 as a little bit of a Grand Tourer, but sadly that never came to fruition. Now one thing I am aware, and again you could forgive it the age of the car, but as we're driving along I can hear a lot of creaks from this plastic dashboard, which seems to be in sort of only a few quite large pieces as well. But again, this was the shape of things to come, the car of the future, very different to anything that had gone before. So we'll just try a bit of a controlled stop. Yeah, they do stop you, but it does take a lot of force on the brake pedal. My foot went down progressively there, but all the way to the floor, and at no point did it feel like the wheels were going to lock up. So viewers, that was my drive in a Triumph TR7, and what did I make of that? Well, does it ride a bit like a skateboard? Yeah, I can definitely see the analogy. You sit incredibly low in this car with your feet out in front of you. I do like the driving position though, because I'm sort of quite long-legged. The steering wheel falls quite nice to hand. I really do like this. The engine felt like it pulled pretty strong. Obviously, we are a bit limited in here as to being able to open the cars up, but yeah, it felt like enough to keep up with modern traffic. I did actually flash somebody who came at the junction and the headlights popped up, and that looked brilliant. The gearbox feels good, the steering actually does feel quite precise, a little heavy when you're manoeuvring in first gear, very, very low speeds, but as soon as you start to move off, you know, 10 miles an hour, steering actually feels pretty good. The car does jiggle a little bit over rough surfaces, and we do have some of those here. You are sat quite close to the rear axle, so you are quite aware of that as well. But would I buy a TR7? Well, actually, yeah, I think I would. I've had a lot of fun in this car, and TR7's been that little bit unloved. Potentially it could be a cheap way into a classic British sports car. Now, I've been reviewing a few cars here today at the Great British Car Journey and Drive Dad's Car, and I've had a great time. I think it's fantastic what they're doing here. Cars like the TR7, for example, it's one of those cars I was never really sure what I was going to make of it, and to be honest, I would have probably never bought one just to find out. So being able to come here today and sample one of these cars has been brilliant. So maybe there's a car that was in your family, maybe it's a car that you missed out on that you wanted to try all those years ago. There's quite a list of vehicles, and I'm sure they'll be looking to expand that all the time, so do have a look on the website, maybe call them up and consider coming down yourself and driving one of these cars, maybe this very car. I'd like to thank you very much for taking the time to watch this video today. Please give us a thumbs up if you've enjoyed it. Also, do consider subscribing, because I do tend to put videos out every week, and hopefully there'll be a lot more of this sort of thing still to come.